There are some builds that I get recommended a million times and I try and figure out how to do it because people want it. But then there's other builds where somebody just has to recommend it once and it just sticks in my head and I can't help but want to build it, and that's kind of what happened with this one. I've only gotten 2 recommendations for her, but the idea kind of just drilled into my mind and I couldn't let it go. So today we're going to be building Saber from the Fate series, more specifically Artoria Pendragon, because this is D&D Builds where we have an outlet to make all sorts of ridiculous Dungeons & Dragons characters and stop driving the people in our lives insane with them. The Fate series is confusing, to say the least. Every season is pretty cool, but all the seasons are very disjointed from one another, so it's kind of hard to keep track of what's going on sometimes. I even tried to watch Giga explain how it works, and it's just impossible for me to follow along. But Saber has popped up a few times throughout the series, so I wanted to build her. She has a couple cool abilities, but first things first, we gotta pick a race. We actually have 2 options here. We could go with what she was when she existed originally, which would be a human, and we could go with human variant to get a bit more flexibility because we'd be able to get a feat. But in the Fate series, famous figures from throughout history are embodied as archetypes, and that's why Saber is Saber, and she is the incarnation of the story of King Arthur. And because she is brought into this world over and over again, I think a more fitting race would be Reborn. When you choose Reborn, you get some unique features, like ancestral legacy, so whatever abilities you had in your earlier life, you get to bring along 2 skills. But we'll choose those skills in just a second. Additionally, you get the feature Deathless Nature. So you have advantage on saving throws against disease and being poisoned, and you have resistance to poison. You have advantage on death saving throws. You don't need to eat, drink, or breathe, and you don't need to sleep, and magic can't put you to sleep. Plus, you can finish a long rest in 4 hours of just being inactive. Then the other feature you get from being a Reborn is knowledge from a past life. So you get random glimpses of your past lives, which might feel more like faded memories from ages ago. Then we get to choose a background, and she is the embodiment of King Arthur, so I'm going to choose the background Noble. This gives us skill proficiencies in history and persuasion, and then before we jump into the ability scores, there's something important we gotta discuss, because Saber in the Fate series has Excalibur, which is kind of a unique sword to say the least, but especially in the Fate series, it's kind of an invisible sword, because obviously it's a powerful sword, but it has this unique ability to be able to kind of turn invisible and then hit somebody with some insane force. And I was really gonna hammer in on this idea, but the only way I could really think to pull it off initially was with some spells like Zephyr Strike or Steel Wind Strike, where you kind of summon a sword into existence that's made of wind. But that would require me to use the class Ranger or Wizard in order to get Steel Wind Strike, and that definitely doesn't feel like Saber. So I went on the hunt for some magic items, and I needed one that was extremely powerful, giving you some bonuses and probably dealing some extra radiant damage when possible, because even if she doesn't turn the sword invisible, there's still plenty of times where it's just glowing and dealing extra damage. So on this hunt, I found the sword Sunblade. It's usually a longsword. It gives you +2 bonus to your attack and damage rolls, and when you hit an undead with it, which kind of feels like anybody you'd be fighting in the Fate series since they're brought back to life, kind of, the target takes an extra 1d8 radiant damage. And it also has the unique feature that it just appears as a longsword hilt. And while you're grasping the hilt, you can use a bonus action to cause the blade of pure radiance to spring into existence or make the blade disappear. So you can swing down with it while it looks like it's not there the entire time, and then suddenly use a bonus action mid-swing to make it pop into existence at the last second. So that felt like it fit the bill. The only downside is that a Sunblade is only rare, and this is Excalibur. It's a bit more legendary. But the other bonus of the Sunblade is that its properties apply to a few other magic weapons. There are 2 legendary weapons that take on the exact same features of the Sunblade, they just get a few other benefits. There's the legendary sword, the Sun Sword, from the Curse of Strahd books, which makes it a sentient weapon, which means it's basically alive, or the sword that feels a little more epic, at least in its name, the Dawnbringer, from the Out of the Abyss book. It's also a sentient weapon, it has all the properties of the Sunblade, and it can even cast Lesser Restoration. So depending on what your DM allows you to have, grab the Sunblade or upgrade it to Dawnbringer or the Sun Sword. And there's actually one more feature of the Sunblade that I'm gonna save for a little bit. But now that we have Excalibur out of the way, Let's go ahead and dive into those stats. We're going to be using point buy from the player's handbook, and Saber is from an anime, which means she's usually pretty good at a lot of stuff because she's basically a main character, so we need to be fairly well-rounded. We're going to take our strength, bump it up to 15 because she does use a longsword and somewhat heavier armor, and then we're going to take our dexterity because she is fairly nimble and bring it up to 12. Then we're going to take our constitution, bring it to a respectable 14 so she can take a few hits. Then we're going to take our intelligence and dump it down to 8 because it's not going to be the primary focus of this build, and it's not quite as useful unless you're going to be inspecting some magic stuff. Then we're going to take our wisdom, bring it up to 10 so it's at least not a negative modifier and she's a little more aware of her surroundings. And then we're going to take our charisma and bump it up to 13 because she is a very beloved character. Then we have our choice of how we want to increase some ability scores based off our racial selection. We're going to choose to increase 3 different scores by 1 point, bringing our strength to 16, our dexterity to 13, and our charisma to 14. And now it's time to choose a starting class. She uses a longsword, she wears heavier armor, so we're gonna need somebody that can do that, and the only choices are gonna be fighter or paladin. And considering how it basically seems like she smites people into oblivion, there's no way we're going to avoid going with Paladin. When you choose Paladin at first level, you get proficiencies in all armor and shields. You can use absolutely any kind of weapon, and you get saving throws in Wisdom and Charisma. Then you get to choose 2 skills. So we're going to take Athletics and Insight from being a Paladin, and then we get to use those 2 other skills from being a reborn. So we'll grab Perception because that's useful almost all the time, and we'll follow it up with Religion because that kind of feels like it just fits the character. At first level of Paladin, you get access to the feature Divine Sense, so you can sense the presence of strong evil, so you know if there's any celestial fiends or undead around. Additionally, you get access to Lay on Hands, so you have a pool of healing that you can replenish yourself or one of your allies with, restoring a number of hit points equal to your paladin level times 5. And if you expend at least 5 hit points from that pool of healing, you can also cure the target of 1 disease or neutralizing a poison. Then at second level of paladin, you get a fighting style. And I was very tempted to take dueling, but it requires that you're wielding a melee weapon in one hand with no other weapons. And frankly, when you're using a longsword, most of the time you're going to be gripping it with both hands. So this doesn't quite work. So instead, we're going to take a very boring option, but it is useful, and take the defense fighting style, giving us a +1 to our armor class. And if we're wearing heavy armor at the same time, that means that our armor class is going to be 19. Additionally, at second level, you get some spell casting. There's a handful of paladin spells you can pick, but you can also use any spell slots you have for casting spells for another feature, Divine Smite. And this was a huge reason why we chose to go with a paladin, because when you deal any damage with a melee weapon, you can activate your Divine Smite, dealing extra damage equal to 2d8 for a first level spell slot, plus an extra 1d8 for any spell slot you spend that's higher than that first level, up to a maximum of 5d8. And you get an extra 1d8 if the target is undead or a fiend. Then at third level of Paladin, you get Divine Health, so you're immune to disease. And at third level, you get to choose a Sacred Oath. And there are 2 oaths that really fit. There is the Oath of the Crown. You are the embodiment of King Arthur. Oath of the Crown just kind of makes sense. But you could also go with Oath of Devotion. You are a very devoted ally in the Holy Grail Wars, and they even get the ability to make their weapon a sacred weapon, allowing you to add your charisma modifier to your attack rolls with your sword, making it far more accurate. But your sword is already a +2 if you have the Sunblade, and frankly, I like the oath spells that you get from being an Oath of the Crown better, because when you choose an oath, you get some default spells as you're leveling up in Paladin. So we're going to take the Oath of the Crown. This gives you some special spells, which we will go through all the spells at the end of this build, and you get Channel Divinity, which you can use for either Champion Challenge, so as a bonus action, you can issue a challenge that compels other creatures to do battle with you, and that feels very spot on for the Holy Grail War. Any creature of your choice within 30 feet of you has to make a Wisdom saving throw, and on a failed save, they can't move more than 30 feet away from you. Or you can use your Channel Divinity for Turn the Tide. So as a bonus action, you can boost up yourself and your allies within 30 feet of you, regaining hit points equal to 1d6 plus your Charisma modifier, as long long as that creature has no more than half of its hit points at the time. Then at 4th level of Paladin, you get an ability score improvement. So we're going to go ahead and boost up our strength by 2 points, making it so we're much better with our sword. Then at 5th level of Paladin, we get the all-important extra attack. So now you can attack twice as your action, and you get access to 2nd level spell slots. Then at 6th level of Paladin, you get Aura of Protection. So now you and any friendly creature within 10 feet of you gets a bonus to all of their saving throws equal to your Charisma modifier. Only caveat is that you have to be conscious for that bonus to kick in. Then at 7th level of Paladin, you get another feature from being an Oath of the Crown, Divine Allegiance. So if a creature within 5 feet of you takes damage, you can use your reaction to magically substitute your own health for that target creature, causing the creature to take no damage, but you take the damage instead. And that damage can't be reduced in any way. Then at 8th level of Paladin, you get another ability score improvement, so we're going to go ahead and max out that strength. And then at 9th level of Paladin, you get some stronger spell slots, so you can smite even harder. Then at 10th level of Paladin, you get Aura of Courage. So now you and any friendly creatures within 10 feet of you are immune to being frightened. Then at 12th level of Paladin, you get Improved Divine Smite. So now you can smite on basically every hit. So whenever you hit a creature with a melee weapon, that creature is just going to default take an extra 1d8 radiant damage. And you can still boost that up even further by spending spell slots to actually use your normal Divine Smite. Then at 12th level of Paladin, you get another ability score improvement. And I want to make sure that you can really take the hits when you need to. So we're going to take a feat. And we're going to take the feat Tough. When you choose this feat, you get an extra 2 hit points per level of your overall build, and this is going to be really helpful for survivability. Then we're going to take a bit of a detour, because while I think going straight Paladin throughout this build would fit for Saber, it's a little boring. And I want to make sure that you can hit a little harder. Granted, you can do that with more Divine Smite stuff, but I want to make sure you can do it very consistently without worrying about running out of spell slots. So we're gonna do a multi-class, and this is gonna sound a little weird, but trust me, it's gonna work. We're gonna multi-class into Rogue. See, I was sneaky there and snuck in that 13 dexterity so we could pull off this multi-class. We're not gonna be focusing on the actual features of being a Rogue most of the way. Just wanna make sure you can hit and strike with efficiency. Not to mention, being a Rogue as a multi-class will really help how we handle combat. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. When you take your first level in Rogue, you get to choose one more skill. So we're gonna go ahead and take Intimidation, and then you get Expertise. So you can double your proficiency bonus with up to 2 skills that you're proficient in thanks to this feature. So we're gonna boost up our Perception and our Athletics. Additionally, at first level of Rogue, you get Sneak Attack, and this is where it's gonna start getting tricky. Because once per turn, you can deal an extra 1d6 of damage to one creature that you hit with an attack if you have advantage on the attack roll, or if the enemy that you're attacking has another enemy within 5 feet of it. And this might be a little difficult, but don't worry, we're going to address that in a second. Because most of the fights in the Holy Grail War are one-on-one, but there's another very important requirement from Sneak Attack. It's that you must be attacking using a finesse or ranged weapon. In Saber, we're already establishing is using a longsword, but there's that other trick I held out on mentioning before, and that's that the Sunblade counts as a finesse weapon. It's a very weird feature to suddenly throw into a longsword, but since we established early on that we have the Sunblade, and that Sunblade has finesse, we can now use Sneak Attack whenever we fulfill the other requirements, allowing us to add an extra 1d6 of damage once per turn, and that Sneak Attack damage goes up as we level up in Rogue. The last feature you get from first level of Rogue is Thieves' Cant, which is just a special way of talking that only rogues can understand. And then at second level of Rogue, you get Cunning Action, and this is going to make you far more versatile on the battlefield. So now as a bonus action, you can take the Dash, Disengage, or Hide action. Dash and Disengage are going to be the most useful for being Saber, allowing you to really dart around the battlefield and back away without taking any damage. Then at third level of Rogue, your Sneak Attack damage upgrades from a 1d6 to a 2d6, and you get to choose a roguish archetype. And we're focusing less on the theme of what Saber is as far as a type of character, and more of her combat abilities. And like I said, she's usually fighting one-on-one. And the one way that we can focus on that idea is by taking the roguish archetype, Swashbuckler. When you choose to be a Swashbuckler at third level of Rogue, you get fancy footwork. So now you don't have to take the disengage action. Whenever you make any sort of melee attack against a creature, that creature can't make any sort of opportunity attack against you for the rest of your turn. So you can jump in, slash away, and jump back out while also using your bonus action to dash so you can get farther away than your enemy might be able to get to you. So you can really jump in, land some hits, jump back out, and they might not be able to even reach you. But the other more important feature that you get from being a swashbuckler is rakish audacity. So now you get a bonus to your initiative rolls equal to your charisma modifier, and you gain 1 workaround for using your sneak attack. Now, you don't need advantage on the attack roll to use your sneak attack against a creature if you are within 5 feet of it, as long as there's no other creatures within 5 feet of you, and you don't have disadvantage on the attack roll. So now if you're fighting one-on-one with somebody, you can always use your sneak attack. Then at 4th level of Rogue, you get an ability score improvement, so we're going to boost up our Constitution by 2 points because we want to get a bit more health. And then at 5th level of Rogue, our sneak attack damage upgrades from a 2d6 to a 3d6, and you get Uncanny Dodge. Like I said, part of why we went into Rogue is that we want to improve our combat capabilities. An Uncanny Dodge makes it so that if an attacker hits you with an attack, you can use your reaction to cut the attack's damage in half. Then at 6th level of Rogue, you get Expertise and 2 more skills, so we'll go ahead and take Intimidation and Insight. Then at 7th level of Rogue, you get Evasion. And like I said, we really wanted to boost up our combat prowess, and Evasion is going to be pretty helpful defensively, because now when you make a Dexterity saving throw, you automatically take half damage if you fail on that saving throw, and if you succeed, you take 0 damage. So all of the massive explosions that are constantly happening in the anime, you have the chance to take absolutely 0 damage from. Additionally, at 7th level of Rogue, your sneak attack damage upgrades from 3d6 to 4d6. Then at 8th level of Rogue and 20th level overall, you get 1 more ability score improvement. We're actually going to take a feat, and we're going to save that for just a second because I got another surprise waiting. But now it's time to choose some spells, because paladins get some spell casting. And usually I would go ahead and choose a bunch of spells, but I'm going to save most of that for the character sheet because this video is already getting plenty long. However, you do get some free spells from your Oath of the Crown, and most of them feel pretty fitting. At 3rd level of Paladin, you're automatically going to get Command and Compelled to Duel, and considering you fight one-on-one, Compelled to Duel really fits. At 5th level of Paladin, you get Warding Bond and Zone of Truth, and then at 9th level of Paladin, you get Aura of Vitality, which is great because you can just constantly heal yourself and people around you, but more importantly, you get one of the best spells for any frontline fighter, Spirit Guardian. So if you activate your Spirit Guardian, it is just a 15-foot aura around you, constantly damaging your enemies and slowing them down. So if you go ahead and you activate your Spirit Guardians right before you get into battle, which, by the way, you get a good boost to your initiative thanks to being able to add your charisma modifier to it from being a swashbuckler rogue. So once the Spirit Guardians is up, you can leave it active for 10 minutes, and as soon as you get into melee range, that creature's going to start having to make some wisdom saves. So you're going to be able to deal 3d8 radiant damage on any failed wisdom save they make every turn, being within your range, or half as much on a successful save. And you can dart in, attack them twice with your Sunblade Longsword, dealing 1d10 for the Longsword, 1d8 for the improved Divine Smite, 4d6 for your sneak attack damage thanks to being a swashbuckler, plus an extra 4d8 from your normal Divine Smite by spending a 3rd level spell slot, which is the most you have access to, plus 5 from your strength modifier, and an additional plus 2 from wielding a Sunblade, dealing up to 81 damage for your first strike. Then with your extra attack, you can deal another 1d10 with your longsword, 1d8 with your improved Divine Smite. No sneak attack damage, but you can still do another regular smite, dealing an additional 4d8 damage, and then you get to add your strength with a plus 5, and that Sunblade damage again for an additional plus 2, leading to 57 damage for your second strike. But remember how I left us off with one last feat to grab? Well, you have an armor class of 19, which means you're pretty difficult to hit most of the time. So we're going to use that to our advantage, because that feat we're going to grab is Martial Adept. This allows us to choose 2 maneuvers from the Battle Master subclass of being a fighter, giving us an extra d6 we can use when we feel like it. And the maneuvers we're going to choose are Trip Attack, just because it's always useful to get your enemy on the ground, giving you advantage on all sorts of stuff. But the more important one we're going to grab is Riposte, because with that armor class of 19, it's going to be harder to hit you. And with the maneuver riposte, when an enemy misses you with a melee attack, you can use your reaction to expend 1 superiority die and make a melee attack against the creature. If you hit, you get to add the superiority die to the attack's damage roll. And here's the other thing. This is your enemy's turn, not your turn. And sneak attack applies once per turn, not once per round, which means that if your enemy misses, you can use riposte and use sneak attack again. So as your reaction, you'll be able to deal another 1d10 from your longsword, 1d8 from your improved divine smite, 4d6 from your sneak attack damage, 4d8 from an upcasted divine smite, and then another +5 from your strength, +2 from your sunblade, and another 1d6 from expending your superiority die, dealing up to another 87 damage as your reaction, dealing a total of 225 damage in a single round just from your attacks. And if you already have Spirit Guardians active, you can deal another 3d8, dealing up to another 24 damage, bringing your grand total to 249 damage in a single round with only 1 spell active, which now that I'm editing this, you actually have to reduce that by 8 points because the Divine Smite you'd be able to cast is 1 level lower because you only have so many spell slots, and you already would have had to have cast Spirit Guardians. So you have 1 less 3rd level spell slot to be able to cast. But it's still a heck of a lot of damage, bringing you to 241 damage in a single round, which is still pretty darn good. This was a hell of a journey to go on for a single build, but like I said, some people recommended it and it kind of got stuck in my head and I really wanted to dive in. Let me know what you think about this build in the comments down below, and if you want access to the character sheet for this build, which will also include all of the spells that I would choose for the Paladin spell list, feel free to check out my Patreon linked in the description down below, just like all of these incredible people. And the especially awesome player character level patrons Andrew Nobles, Alex, Melendez Robinson, Karkat Kitsune, Zed13, Yaksha Senpai, the Dino 21, and Benjamin. Then going above and beyond even them is my Dungeon Master level patrons that I actually play D&D with, which I stream over on Twitch and then post the VODs up here on YouTube. Daniel Sweeten, Conman ZX, Nathaniel Sims, Cyberciety, Talon Starkey, Demiurge, Braden Aldridge, Daniel Galvin, Michael, Eric Wade, Salvador, Kilo, and Heyo. Then going above anything I could possibly imagine is my God tier level patron. I cannot thank this guy enough. He goes above and beyond anything I would ever expect, and that's Game Steak. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, let me know by hitting that like button, and I'll be here helping you roll at least 3 nat 20s in your next D&D session, especially if you want to play as Artoria Pendragon, aka Saber, from the Fate series in Dungeons & Dragons.